All right, we're going to get into our fourth and final way to solve quadratic equations, but before we do that, let's talk about the three different ways we have been solving. So the very first thing we started with was factoring. Okay, and some things we need to remember for factoring. You're going to always start with GCF, and then you're using the super X. You may have in there some special products. Remember, difference of squares. And if you know the trick for that, you can use it. If not, super X is always going to work. One thing we do need to remember for factoring, though, is our equation must be in standard form. Okay. And just in case we forgot, standard form for a quadratic equation is ax squared plus bx plus c. Okay, standard form for a quadratic equation is ax squared plus bx plus c. So factoring is the first thing we went through. We then talked about taking square roots. Okay. The third one we talked about was completing the square, so that's what we finished up with last week. And remember, the form that we kind of had to write that in was ax squared plus bx plus something, and then we had our constant plus something, and this is where we used b divided by 2 squared to fill in those blanks. Okay. Our fourth and final way to solve a quadratic equation is the quadratic formula. And actually down the side here, so I'm going to do ways to solve quadratic equations. Okay. So last one's a quadratic formula. In order to use the quadratic formula, your equation must be in standard form. So just like with factoring, we have to set our equation equal to 0. And we know we're going to have an equation because we're solving, so you will have that equal sign. And then one other fabulously cool thing about the quadratic formula is that it always works. So you may remember that when we were factoring, there were times where we got an answer that was not factorable. And we said that even though we couldn't factor it, there would be additional things that we could do to solve. So one of those could have been taking square roots, one of those could have been completing the square, and then the last one's quadratic formula. So if you're not sure how to solve a quadratic equation, quadratic formula always will work, okay? All right, so let's kind of jump into this. We talked about the discriminant and how there are different types of solutions. Now the discriminant comes from the quadratic formula. So the quadratic formula is x equals negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. All right, so we have the quadratic formula. What's underneath the square root should look really familiar to you, so that's going to be the discriminant. As you work through these problems, you should check what kind of solution you get underneath the square root or that discriminant part, and that'll tell you what your final answer is going to be. So that's how I'm going to go through these with you, so that we know what our final answer is going to be. Because the nice thing is, if you know what this is supposed to be based off your final answer, and you get something different, you know you did it wrong, and you can go back and kind of figure out where things went wrong for you. So let's start with this. How about x squared plus 2x minus 63 equals 0. Okay, so remember, quadratic formula must be in standard form. So ax squared plus bx plus c. So we're good there, right? We're set equal to 0. Second thing we want to do is identify our a, b, and c. So a is 1, b is 2, c is negative 63. And then we are literally going to plug things in. If you try to skip too many steps and do too much mental math, I feel like you're going to struggle here. You're not going to know where you went wrong. So until you are pros, you need to make sure that you are writing down all the steps. Okay? So the formula is negative b. So we're going to plug in b, right? So we're going to plug in 2, but it's going to be a negative 2. So negative 2 plus or minus the square root. Okay, so I'm plugging in 2 again. 2 squared minus 4 times a times c. All over 2 times a. Okay, so I literally just plugged everything in. Wherever I saw a b, I put the 2. Wherever I saw an a, I put 1. And wherever I saw a c, I put negative 63. Now we're going to simplify. Okay, so negative 2 plus or minus, nothing changes there. What do I get underneath the square root? So 2 squared is 4, and remember you did this when you did the discriminant. Negative 4 times 1 is negative 4. Negative 4 times negative 63 is a positive 252 all over 2. Okay, I'm going to keep simplifying underneath the square root. So negative 2 plus or minus the square root of 4 plus 252 is a 256 all over 2. So if I look at what's underneath this radical, which is my discriminant, remember we talked about that, it's a positive number. So a positive number tells me I'm going to have 2 real solutions at the end. Okay, 2 real solutions, which means I will not be in your answer, and you're going to have 2 different answers. Okay, I'm going to keep going. Now, remember, when we're simplifying radicals, the first thing we should check for is if 256 is a perfect square. So for those of you that have this calculator, just a reminder, it's second square root of 256. Okay, 256 is a perfect square. So if it's a perfect square, I can get rid of the radical. So negative 2 plus or minus 16 over 2. Okay, and we're literally going to break this into 2 separate equations, just like we did with completing the square, just like we did with taking square roots. That plus or minus tells me I have 2 separate equations. Okay, so first things first, I have a negative 2 plus 16 divided by 2, negative 2 plus 16 divided by 2, oops, and a negative 2 minus 16 divided by 2. And we have to keep simplifying. Negative 2 plus 16 is 14. 14 divided by 2 is 7. Negative 2 minus 16 is negative 18. Negative 18 divided by 2 is negative 9. So in this case, x equals 7 and x equals negative 9. So I told you at the beginning, quadratic formula always works, but it's a lot of work to do the quadratic formula. So sometimes factoring or taking square roots or completing the square might be quicker for you. The nice thing is if you don't know, quadratic formula is going to be your go-to. Okay, let's look at How about 4x squared plus 1 equals negative 4x. So let's do one more together, and then why don't you guys try one on your own, okay? So one more together. First things first, are we in standard form? Okay, do I have ax squared plus bx plus c? Or really, is my equation set equal to 0? And hopefully you're answering no. So I'm going to start by adding 4x to both sides. Now I can't combine anything here, so I'm just going to rewrite it. So 4x squared plus 4x plus 1 equals 0. Identify A, B, and C. So A equals 4, B equals 4, C equals 1. Okay, once A, B, and C are identified, we're going to plug it into the formula. So negative B, so I have a 4 for B. I'm going to plug it in. Remember, the negative B is part of the equation. So negative 4 plus or minus the square root of B squared minus 4 times A times C. So I'm plugging in the B, the A, and the C all over 2 times, whoops, and I plugged that in wrong. Sorry, A should be 4. So negative 4 times 4 times 1. Okay, that's better. All over 2 times A. So make sure, because there's a good example of a mistake, make sure that you go back and you plugged everything in right, because obviously if things aren't plugged in right, you cannot get to that final answer. All right, here we go. Simplify what's underneath the radical first. So I'm just going to rewrite negative 4 plus or minus 4 squared is 16. Negative 4 times 4 is negative 16. Negative 16 times 1 is still negative 16. All over 2 times 4, which is 8. Okay. So now I have negative 4 plus or minus 16 minus 16 is 0. Okay, so this is the point where I think back to the discriminant, and if the discriminant is 0, then I will have one real solution. So at the very end, I'm only going to have one answer, and here's why we only have one answer. Okay, if I keep simplifying this, I get negative 4 plus or minus, what is the square root of 0? If you're not sure, I'm going to take your fancy calculator. The square root of 0 is 0. Okay, there's really no such thing as a negative 0. So this is really just negative 4 over 8. And I can reduce negative 4 over 8 to negative 1/2. So in this case, x equals negative 1/2. Okay, so again, the discriminant tells you how many solutions you're going to have at the end. So I know this is 0, which means I know I'm only going to have one answer. Okay. All right, you're going to try this last one. So as soon as I write it, I'd like you to pause the video and try it on your own. I'm running out of space. We did this one, we did this one. All right, why don't you try 2x squared plus 3x equals 5. 2x squared plus 3x equals 5. So take a second, pause the video, and see how far you can get. It's important that you can do it on your own and not just watching. Okay? When you're ready, come start the video again, and we'll go through it. All right, I'm not in standard form. Okay, I know I need to get this set equal to 0, so I'm going to start by subtracting 5 from both sides, giving me 2x squared plus 3x minus 5 equals 0. I'm now going to identify my A, my B, and my C. I'm going to take A, B, and C and plug it into the quadratic formula. I am going to move up here just so I have some space. So negative B, so negative 3 plus or minus the square root of B squared minus 4 times A times C all over 2 times A. So I moved up here. All right, let's keep simplifying. Negative 3 plus or minus the square root. 3 squared is 9. Negative 4 times 2 is negative 8. Negative 8 times negative 5 is a positive 40. All over 4. So negative 3 plus or minus the square root of 9 and 40 is 49 all over 4. Okay, I have a 49 underneath my radical. It's a positive number. So my discriminant tells me that I will have 2 real solutions. Okay, I'm going to come up here. So negative 3 plus or minus, the square root of 49 is 7 all over 4. I'm going to break this answer into 2 before I simplify. So negative 3 plus 7 divided by 4 and negative 3 minus 7 divided by 4. Negative 3 plus 7 is 4. 4 divided by 4 is 1. Negative 3 minus 7 is a negative 10. Okay, negative 10 over 4 isn't going to give me a whole number, but I can reduce that fraction by 2. And I end up with negative 5 halves. Oops, let me move this so you can see a little bit better. There we go. Okay, so negative 5 halves.